The coffee shop window fogged with November rain, blurring the street outside into watercolor streaks. He sat alone, nursing a cappuccino that had gone cold an hour ago, when he saw her. She walked past slowly, one hand resting on the unmistakable curve of her belly. 6 months pregnant, maybe 7. The world tilted sideways. His hand trembled as he set down the cup, the ceramic chattering against the saucer. 3 years of marriage. One devastating conversation. 6 months since the divorce papers were signed. And now this. The timeline carved itself into his brain with surgical precision. If she was 6 or 7 months along, that meant conception happened around April or May. They'd separated in March. The divorce was finalized in May. The math was impossible to ignore, yet somehow impossible to accept. During their marriage, she'd been adamant. "I'm not ready for kids," she'd said repeatedly, her voice firm whenever he'd broached the subject. He'd accepted it, though it hollowed something out inside him. He'd always wanted to be a father, had imagined tiny hands wrapped around his fingers, bedtime stories, teaching someone to ride a bike. But he loved her more than those dreams, so he'd folded them away. Then came the day she told him about the pregnancy. She'd been clinical about it, almost detached. "I'm pregnant. I'm not keeping it. I have an appointment next week." He'd felt the floor drop out from under him. "We could make this work," he'd pleaded. "I know you're scared, but we could." "No." Her voice had been ice. "This isn't a discussion. This is my choice, and I'm telling you as a courtesy." The appointment had been on a Tuesday. She'd gone alone, insisted on it. He'd sat in their apartment, staring at walls that suddenly felt like a cage, grieving for a child that would never exist. When she came home that evening, she was quiet, withdrawn. He'd tried to comfort her, but she'd shrugged him off. "It's done. I don't want to talk about it." They never did. The silence around that day grew teeth, chewing away at the foundation of their marriage. She became distant, staying late at work, taking weekend trips with friends he'd never met. When he'd try to connect, she'd snap at him or simply look through him like he was glass. The separation came 3 months later. She'd been the one to suggest it, and by then, he was too exhausted to fight. The divorce followed quickly, almost mechanically. No drama, no contested assets. She'd wanted out, and he'd let her go. Now, watching her disappear down the rain-soaked street, her hand cradling that pregnant belly, something crystallized in his chest. Not quite anger, not quite betrayal. Something colder and more certain. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands, opening the calendar app. March 15th, the day she'd moved out. May 23rd, the day the divorce was finalized. He counted backward from what he estimated was her due date. January, maybe early February. Conception, late April, early May. They'd still been legally married. Separated, but married. His mind raced through the last months of their marriage. The late nights. The mysterious texts she'd hide when he entered the room. The weekend she'd gone to visit her college roommate and come back smelling like cologne that wasn't his. The way she'd flinched when he tried to touch her. He'd blamed himself for their growing distance. Had thought maybe he'd been too pushy about wanting children, too clingy, too something. He'd spent the last 6 months in therapy, picking apart his faults, trying to understand where he'd failed. But this recast everything in a different light. She hadn't had an abortion. She'd lied. But why? The answer clawed at him with cold certainty. The baby she'd claimed to terminate hadn't been his. Or she'd already been pregnant with someone else's child and used the abortion story as a cover. Or... He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Other patrons glanced up, startled. He needed to know. Needed to understand. This lie had cost him everything, his marriage, his chance at fatherhood, 6 months of self-blame and grief. He had to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. He didn't sleep that night. The ceiling of his studio apartment became a movie screen playing endless loops of her pregnant silhouette, the protective curve of her hand over her belly, the soft smile he'd glimpsed on her face before she turned the corner. That smile haunted him most of all. He'd never seen her look that way, peaceful, content, almost glowing. Certainly not during their marriage. By dawn, he'd made a decision. He needed answers, but confronting her directly would lead nowhere. She'd perfected the art of shutting him out long before the divorce. No, this required subtlety. He started with social media. She'd blocked him on everything immediately after the separation, but he created a dummy account, carefully designed to look like a real person. Photos borrowed from stock image sites, a smattering of generic posts about coffee and sunsets. He didn't send her a friend request. He didn't need to. Her accounts were public. What he found made his stomach turn. Photos of her blossoming pregnancy littered her Instagram, going back to July. Maternity shoots in flowing dresses. Plates of elaborate food with captions about eating for two. A picture of a nursery being painted a soft yellow. But it was the comments that drew his attention. "So happy for you and Daniel," one read. "You two are going to be amazing parents," said another. "About time Daniel made an honest woman of you." Daniel. He didn't recognize the name. He scrolled through her photos, going back, searching for a face to match the name. He found it in a post from March, right when they'd separated. "New beginnings," she'd captioned it. The photo showed her at a restaurant, leaning against a man with dark hair and an easy smile. Their body language spoke volumes, her hand on his arm, his eyes on her face with unmistakable adoration. The date stamp, March 17th. 2 days after she'd moved out of their apartment. He screenshot everything, his hands steadier now, his grief crystallizing into something harder. Then he went deeper, clicking through to Daniel's profile. Daniel Chen, according to his bio. Senior project manager at Technova Solutions. The same company where she worked. His heart hammered as he scrolled through Daniel's feed. There, a photo from February, a company retreat in the mountains. She was in the background, laughing at something Daniel was saying. Another from January, a group photo at a bar, but her eyes were only on Daniel. December, a Christmas party, the two of them under mistletoe, the caption joking about forced holiday fun. He sat back, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. This hadn't been a sudden thing. This had been building for months, maybe longer. While he'd been sleeping beside her, talking about their future, trying to save their marriage, she'd been falling in love with someone else. But the baby. When had she gotten pregnant? He pulled up a due date calculator online. If she was 6 to 7 months now, in late November, conception would have been in April or May. After she'd moved out. After she'd told him about the abortion. A horrible thought occurred to him. He opened his banking app, scrolling back to February. There, a charge to Women's Health Associates. $500. The amount she'd told him the procedure would cost. He'd insisted on paying, had watched their joint account decrease by exactly that amount. But what if she hadn't had an abortion at all? What if she'd simply pocketed the money and lied? No. He forced himself to think clearly. She'd been genuinely upset for days after that supposed appointment. Withdrawn. Emotional. She'd bled, he remembered seeing evidence of it. She'd complained of cramping. But women could bleed for other reasons. And what if her emotional state hadn't been about losing a baby, but about guilt? About the affair she was having? About the lies she was building? He needed more than social media stalking. He needed concrete evidence. Over the next week, he became someone he didn't recognize. He drove past a new apartment, a sleek high-rise in the downtown district he'd never been able to afford. He saw Daniel's car parked in the visitors' lot multiple times. He watched them come and go, Daniel's hand always on the small of her back, proprietary and tender. He called Women's Health Associates, claiming to be following up on an appointment for his wife. The receptionist was sympathetic but firm. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't confirm or deny any patient's visits due to HIPAA regulations. If you need records, your wife will need to request them herself." Dead end. Then he remembered, she'd had the same insurance company during their marriage that she likely still had through work. And he'd been a covered dependent. Some of those benefits records might still be accessible through the online portal. It took him 3 tries to remember the login credentials, his old email address and a password they'd shared. He held his breath as he clicked through to the claims history. There. February 23rd. Women's Health Associates. But the procedure code wasn't for a termination. It was for a routine gynecological exam and birth control consultation. She'd never had an abortion at all. He sat in his car across from her apartment building for 2 hours before he found the courage to go in. The manila envelope on his passenger seat contained everything: printouts of social media posts, screenshots of the insurance claims, a timeline he'd constructed with dates and evidence meticulously documented. 6 months of therapy had taught him about healthy boundaries, about letting go, about accepting that closure sometimes never comes. But this wasn't about closure. This was about the truth, a truth that had been deliberately hidden from him, that had reshaped his entire sense of reality. The lobby was all glass and steel, intimidatingly modern. He buzzed her apartment. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. He was about to leave when a resident exited, and he caught the door, slipping inside. Her apartment was on the 7th floor. He stood outside 7C for a full minute, his finger hovering over the doorbell. Through the door, he could hear music playing, something classical and soft. He rang. Footsteps. Then her voice, cautious. "Who is it?" "It's me. We need to talk." Silence stretched so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then the locks clicked, and the door opened a crack, the chain still engaged. Her face appeared in the gap, and he saw the immediate wariness in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" "I saw you," he said simply. "Last week. At the coffee shop on Meridian." Her face paled. "You've been following me." "No. It was a coincidence. But after I saw you, I started looking for answers." He held up the envelope. "And I found them." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something had shifted. The wariness was still there, but underneath it, he saw resignation. Maybe even relief. "You should have left it alone. You lied to me. About everything. Please keep your voice down. Daniel's asleep." The mention of the other man's name, spoken so casually, so domestically, sent a spike of pain through his chest. "I don't care about him right now. I care about the baby. About the abortion that never happened. About the $500 you took from me for a procedure you never had." Her jaw tightened. "Fine. Come in. But quietly." She unlatched the chain and opened the door. The apartment was beautiful. High ceilings, hardwood floors, furniture that actually matched. A pregnancy pillow sat on the couch. Baby books were stacked on the coffee table. On the wall hung a framed sonogram image. "Nice place," he said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "Upgraded from what we had. Don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't come into my home and judge my life. Your life that was built on lies." She moved to the couch, lowering herself carefully. In the soft lamplight, her pregnancy was even more evident. 7 months, he estimated. Maybe more. "What do you want?" she asked tiredly. "An apology? An explanation? What will make you leave me alone?" "The truth. Just the truth." He sat across from her, the envelope on his knees. "When did you get pregnant? And whose baby is it?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "I got pregnant in April. The baby is Daniel's. Due date is February 8th. April. After she'd moved out. The relief was immediate and confusing. At least the child wasn't his, wasn't another lie. But it was quickly replaced by a deeper anger. And the abortion in February. There was no abortion. "I know. I saw the insurance records. You had a birth control consultation. So what was the $500 for?" She looked away. "First month's rent deposit. I needed money to move in with Daniel, and I knew you wouldn't just give it to me if I asked." The words hit like physical blows. "So you invented a pregnancy. Made me grieve for a child that never existed. Let me believe you'd terminated our baby. All for money." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" His voice rose despite himself. Explain it to me. Make it make sense. I was trapped. The words burst out of her. I was miserable in our marriage, in love with someone else, and too much of a coward to just leave cleanly. You were so good, so understanding, so willing to work on things. It made me hate myself. And I thought, she stopped, swallowing hard. I thought if you believed I'd had an abortion, that I'd killed our chance at a family, you'd hate me enough to let me go without a fight. The simplicity of it stunned him. The cruelty. You wanted me to hate you. I wanted you to stop loving me. Because your love was suffocating. Every time you looked at me with those hopeful eyes, asking if we could try, if we could fix things, I felt myself drowning. I needed you to give up. So you created the most painful lie you could think of. She met his eyes then, and he saw tears streaming down her face. Yes. Daniel emerged from the bedroom wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair disheveled. He stopped when he saw them, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something harder. What's going on? He knows, she said quietly. About everything. Daniel looked at him, and there was no animosity there, just a kind of wary assessment. You're her ex-husband. I am. You should leave. This isn't good for her, or the baby. Stress. Don't. The word came out sharp. Don't talk to me about what's good for her. You don't get to play the protective boyfriend when you're part of the reason my marriage ended. Your marriage ended because she didn't love you anymore. Daniel's voice was level, matter-of-fact. That's no one's fault. It just is. She was sleeping with you while we were still married. No, actually. Daniel moved to sit beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. We didn't sleep together until after she moved out. We were friends first. Yes. Close friends. Maybe emotionally inappropriate friends. But we didn't cross physical lines until after she left you. That's supposed to make it better. It's supposed to be the truth, which is apparently what you came here for. He looked between them, seeing the united front, the easy intimacy. They belonged together in a way he and she never had, and that realization was a fresh wound. Why did you tell me you were pregnant in February? He asked her. If the baby isn't mine, if you got pregnant in April, what was that about? She wiped at her tears. I was pregnant in February. I was 9 weeks along. The world tilted again. What? I found out in January. I'd been careful, we were always careful, but birth control fails. And I panicked. Because I knew. She looked at Daniel, then back at him. I knew it wasn't your baby. The words hung in the air like smoke. How could you know? Because we hadn't had sex in 3 months. Not since October. Her voice was flat, reciting facts. You were always too tired, or I was too tired, or we were fighting. The last time was October 15th. I remember because it was your birthday, and I felt obligated. The memory surfaced, painful and clear. His birthday. Her mechanical responses. The way she'd showered immediately afterward. So if you were 9 weeks pregnant in January. Conception was in November. Late November. She pulled her hand from Daniel's, wrapping her arms around herself. At the company retreat. He looked at Daniel, saw the truth in his face. You said you didn't sleep together until after she left. I lied. Daniel's voice was rough. I'm sorry. But yes, we slept together at the retreat. Once. We were drunk, and it was a mistake, or we thought it was. We agreed it couldn't happen again, that we needed to be professional. Then she found out she was pregnant. The timeline was complete now, every piece clicking into horrible place. So you came to me and said you were pregnant but weren't keeping it. You let me believe it was my child. Let me grieve. Took money from me for an abortion. When really you just needed me out of the way so you could be with him. I did have the abortion. Her voice cracked. I went through with it. Because I was terrified and confused and I didn't know what to do. Daniel and I weren't even together then. Not really. It was a one-night mistake. And you were my husband. You deserved better than a wife pregnant with another man's child. So you terminated the pregnancy. Yes. I terminated Daniel's baby. She was crying openly now. And then I told you I wanted a separation, because I couldn't stay in the marriage after what I'd done. The guilt was eating me alive. But I couldn't tell you the truth because it would destroy you, and despite everything, I didn't want to hurt you more than necessary. More than necessary, he repeated numbly. And then in April, after the divorce was final, Daniel and I started seeing each other officially. And I got pregnant again. This time, I kept it. Because this time, I was free. We were free. He sat back, the envelope sliding from his lap to the floor. All the evidence he'd gathered felt meaningless now. The truth was so much worse than anything he'd imagined, and yet also somehow less personal. She hadn't lied to hurt him specifically. She'd lied to protect herself, to make her escape easier. You could have just told me you were having an affair. That you wanted a divorce. I would have given it to you. Would you? Her eyes met his, challenging. Really? Because every time I tried to create distance, you fought harder to close it. Every time I pulled away, you asked what you could do to fix things. You loved me so much it was like being trapped in a cage made of good intentions. The words hurt because they were partially true. He had fought for their marriage. Had refused to see what was obvious in hindsight. I'm sorry, she said softly. I'm sorry for lying. For the abortion story. For taking your money. For all of it. You deserved honesty, and I didn't give it to you because I was a coward. 3 weeks later, he sat in his therapist's office, the winter sun streaming through the windows, warming the leather chair he'd spent so many hours in. How are you feeling about everything now? Dr. Sarah asked, her pen poised over her notepad. I don't know. Lighter, maybe. And sadder. He looked down at his hands. The truth was worse than I imagined, but also having it makes things clearer. I'm not questioning myself anymore. That's significant progress. He'd told her everything, the coffee shop sighting, the investigation, the confrontation. Dr. Sarah had listened without judgment, helping him process the layers of betrayal and grief. I've been thinking about what she said. About my love being suffocating. He shifted in his seat. Was I too much? Did I love her wrong? You loved her the best way you knew how. But love isn't always enough, especially when two people want fundamentally different things. And it sounds like she wasn't honest about what she wanted until it was too late. She wanted an escape route more than she wanted to be honest. Yes. And she hurt you deeply in creating that escape. But that says more about where she was emotionally than about your worth as a partner. He nodded slowly. That was the hardest part to accept, that her choices weren't really about him at all. She hadn't fallen out of love with him because he was flawed or insufficient. She'd fallen out of love because she'd fallen in love with someone else, and rather than handle it with courage and integrity, she'd chosen deception. I think I understand now why she made up the abortion story, he said. She needed me to let her go without a fight. And she knew that would do it. It was manipulative. It was. But it was also desperate. She felt trapped, and she lashed out in the worst way possible. He paused. I don't forgive her. But I think I understand her. Dr. Sarah smiled slightly. Understanding without forgiving is healthy. You can have compassion for her situation while still acknowledging she hurt you. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then he said, I heard from her last week. She sent me a letter. Do you want to talk about it? He pulled the envelope from his jacket pocket. He'd read it a dozen times, the words seared into his memory. But he unfolded it anyway, looking at her familiar handwriting. She apologized again. Said she knows nothing she can say will undo the damage. But she wanted me to know that the baby's due in February, and they're naming her Emma. And that she hopes someday I find someone who loves me the way I deserve to be loved. His voice caught. She said I'd make an amazing father someday, and she's sorry she couldn't be the one to give me that. How did that make you feel? Angry. Sad. But also, I don't know. It felt like a real apology. Not one designed to make herself feel better, but one that acknowledged what she took from me. He refolded the letter carefully. I'm not going to respond. But I'm also not going to throw it away. That seems wise. He'd made other changes too. He'd deleted the dummy social media account, stopped checking her profiles. He'd picked up hobbies he'd abandoned during his marriage: woodworking, hiking, cooking elaborate meals just for himself. He'd started dating, nothing serious, just coffee dates and dinners with women he met through apps. It felt strange, learning to be single again, but also freeing. Last week, he'd gone on a third date with someone, a kindergarten teacher named Amy who laughed loudly and told terrible jokes and didn't remind him of his ex-wife at all. They'd kissed goodnight, and he'd felt something he hadn't felt in years: possibility. I think I'm ready to move forward, he told Dr. Sarah. Really move forward, not just say I am. What does that look like for you? It looks like accepting that my marriage ended, and it wasn't entirely my fault. It looks like believing I can have the life I want, the partner, the kids, the whole thing, just not with her. It looks like forgiving myself for not seeing the signs sooner and for loving someone who couldn't love me back the same way. Dr. Sarah's smile was warm. That sounds like real healing. As he left the office, stepping into the bright December afternoon, he felt something shift inside him. The weight he'd been carrying, the grief, the confusion, the self-blame, didn't disappear entirely. Healing wasn't linear, and he knew there would be hard days still to come. But for the first time since seeing her pregnant outside that coffee shop, he felt like himself again. Not the man he'd been during the marriage, constantly trying to fix something that was broken. Not the man he'd been immediately after the divorce, drowning in guilt and questions. But someone new. Someone who'd been hurt and had chosen to heal. Someone who knew his own worth and wouldn't settle for less than genuine love. His phone buzzed. A text from Amy: "Still on for dinner tomorrow? I found this amazing Thai place." He smiled and typed back, "Absolutely. Can't wait." And he meant it. The past was still there, with all its pain and complications. The truth he'd uncovered hadn't brought closure, nothing ever really did. But it had brought clarity, and clarity was enough. He walked to his car, the winter sun on his face, and thought about the future. Somewhere out there was a life he hadn't planned, full of people he hadn't met yet, moments he couldn't predict. His ex-wife would have her baby in February, would build a life with Daniel, would move forward in her own way. And he would move forward too. Different path, different destination. But forward nonetheless. The baby that never was, both the one she'd claimed to abort and the one that had been real, would always be a shadow in his story. But shadows proved there was light somewhere. And he was finally ready to step back into it. As he drove home through the city streets, past the coffee shop where everything had begun to unravel and rebuild, he thought about what Dr. Sarah had said months ago, when he'd first started therapy. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us leads us to the best version of ourselves. He hadn't believed it then. But now, watching the world pass by his window, thinking about Amy's laugh and the woodworking project waiting in his garage and the life stretching out ahead of him, he thought maybe, just maybe, it might be true. The story of his marriage was over. The story of what came next was just beginning. And this time, he'd write it himself.